Happy Tuesday, besties and bosses. Let me make sure that this is actually streaming in the group. I have a very special guest today. I have a dear friend, a mentor, a coach I've worked with, Annie Gichuru. I'm pretty sure I just butchered her name. So I'm going to have her introduce herself. But we're going to be talking about a really important topic today. I've had the honor of working with Annie before. Some of you might know her. She was on the podcast on episode 24. She's a DEI coach and consultant. And we're going to be talking about really, really important topic. Okay, I do see we're live, but I see that Annie is not showing. So let me change our settings here on the view. This might do us here. Annie, while I'm playing with the tech here, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell everyone a little bit about your magic.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Annie Gichuru. I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion coach and consultant for online business owners such as yourself. And what my mission is to help you build a business that is racially equitable so you can be intentionally inclusive. I think the idea of being inclusive is something that a lot of business owners are gravitating to, and more so having had the awareness now, post George Floyd. It was such a racial awakening, if I can say, and humans wanting to do better, wanting to see where their blind spots are and how they can really serve from a place of integrity, not leaving anyone behind who could be well and truly a potential and great ideal client. And so doing this work in a way that feels good for me, and leading with love and kindness and calling in rather than calling out, helping people really understand the differences that exist between, Black and white, so to speak. What are those historical discontents? Where did they originate from? How did they get us to where we are today? And what can we do to unlearn those things and be in a position to do better? And not placing the expectation on anybody to not make mistakes in this work. Because let's be honest, we are human. We are going to make mistakes before we get it right. And it takes a degree of courage. It takes a degree of bravery to even step into the arena of this work. Even though you have privilege, and we all have some degree of privilege, may I say, but given whatever kind of privilege you have, it does take a degree of courage to lock eyes with this work and be in it. And so for me, as somebody who facilitates this work, who coaches, who educates, doing it in a way that allows people to want to sit in that arena, judgment-free, making mistakes, but also committing to doing better. Like I learned that is not the way to do it. But I was given grace, giving room for grace for people to fall, to make mistakes, but to rise up and learn from that and to do better. And I think that's what sets me apart in this work. And also just having a background where I grew up in Kenya. I'm Kenyan, raised and born there, but then moved to Australia when I was about 19, 20 to do my tertiary degree, my university studies. So already I had grown up in an environment where race wasn't an issue for me. So my formative years were really all about solidifying who I am as a human being. So I come into this work from a very different lens, and then stepping into Australia, where now I started feeling those differences and wondering, well, why are things so different? Why do people treat me a little bit differently? And so ultimately coming into this with that experience, but also being in corporate Australia and doing this work from a D&I perspective, diversity and inclusion, using my HR experience. I have a master's degree in human resources. And so being able to now step into the coaching industry and really bring this work that is much needed in our industry. I think it's something that's been left out and is very much needed. We cannot do business without it. It's part and parcel of how we should be doing business. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Kim.
Thank you so much for being here and having this conversation with us. I couldn't agree more with you. The work is so important. And I think so many of us are almost coming to a late awakening, like you said, with George Floyd, with the different things that were almost getting hit over the head and can't ignore it anymore. And I know I gravitated towards your work. I've worked with you in your program, and everything you're saying is true times 1,000 and million times in terms of how you hold space. And I think your approach is so different. And I think that's part of what had me lean in, because I think there's one thing for all of us to say we want to do the work, we want to be a part of the change, we want to do better. And then I think what you said, you hit the nail on the head. I think there's so much fear. I know for me, a perfectionism tendency that can come up where it's almost like, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to do this wrong. I don't want to get called out, that causes us to freeze. And your approach it kind of does the opposite and pulls us through that. So I appreciate you and your approach so much, but I also think it's kind of what makes you different, what makes you stand out. And it's also what our conversation is going to be about today. So it's a really beautiful entry point for that conversation. But thank you for sharing your time and with us. I thought, let me just pull up the group. Yes, we are live there. Okay. What I thought for everyone here, because I wanted to, we're going to be talking about the difference between calling in and calling out, which Annie started sharing a few moments ago, and just what a different approach that is for this work. And I mean, I can speak to it from the experience being coached by you in a container with you, but I think you can speak to it through such a different lens. And before we hit live here and we were chatting, I was telling Annie, I revisited one of the TED Talks she shared with us in her program in Represented. And I'm going to read this for everyone here, because I think this is just such a great kickoff for us. There was a TED Talk from Loretta J. Ross, and I will link to that if that's okay with you, Annie, afterwards. Sure. And okay, I just want to make sure for that. And Loretta says in this came from her mentor at the time, which is the civil rights leader, Reverend C.T. Vivian, who was an aide to Dr. Martin Luther King. And what was said to her was, when you ask people to give up hate, you need to be there for them when they do. When you ask people to give up hate, you need to be there for them when they do. And I think that was one of the most, it literally, every time I hear that, just one of the most profound statements, period, full stop. And I think it's so much of what your work and your approach is. And I think it's sort of the definition, or the example of what calling in is, but it's so different from, I think, how most of us think of this work. So maybe just to start off, if you wouldn't mind sharing, when you hear that and when you think about calling in, what that means to you and for you, how you see that.
When I think of calling in, and I love that quote, oh my God, how powerful is it? The first time I came across it, I was like, I had never looked at it from that lens. Like, if you ask people to give up hate, you've got to be there for them when they do. And I think because we've gotten into we're living in a world where there's so much frustration, there's so much anger, there's so much hurt and brokenness that people just do not have the capacity to hold that space that is required to bring about healing. And so I really get it when I see a lot of other educators being exhausted, being frustrated, because that is their lived experience. That is what they've lived with probably since they were born. They have been a minority and they have been treated in a certain way. And they're just exhausted of having to be in that position, have that identity, and now be in a position where you're constantly correcting. I too, if that was my lived experience, if that was my upbringing, I would be exhausted. And there would be a degree of not wanting to hold this space in a way that is comfortable. It would be more of a calling out because of the exhaustion. So totally understand the lived experience and why those would do it that way. And it's not to say that it is wrong. I just believe that there's room for different ways of doing this work. And so for me, when it comes to calling in, it is, I gravitate to that because as somebody who is a constant learner, I am learning, I'm a student of life. I want to be held in a way that gives me room to ask questions, to understand, and not be treated in a way that, well, you should know that. But well, you should know that. But it's all there. Haven't you Googled it? Haven't you read about it? Like, I want to be treated in a way that when I ask a question, it is taken with the intent that I put it out with, and that I am held with respect, and that I am called in. I am called in if I need to be called in, but I'm held in a space that allows me to keep showing up in that space to learn. And an example that I often use with my clients is, imagine a child who's starting to walk, a baby who's trying to walk. They will stand up, they will fall, they will stand up and fall, and probably do that for weeks. There is no parent caregiver who goes like, oh, come on now, you keep falling down, why aren't you walking? And when they start walking, they will crawl maybe, or they will take their little step, and they will be shaking and trembling, and they'll fall down again. But it's the constant encouragement of, come on, you can do this, you can do this. That's holding a space where you're calling in, and you're not necessarily calling them out for mistakes that they're making that they potentially don't know. And we are talking about two different people here, people who genuinely want to get into the arena of this work and learn, and those who perhaps are not there to learn and they do not want to do better. Those are the ones who get called out, right? The people who are beyond being called in. And I think we know some politicians who are beyond being called in, because as much as they say, hey, look, I am not racist, the actions speak very, very differently. And more so, I suppose, in the United States, where we have seen this in full display, and coming now to over a year of the insurrection on the Capitol. We can well and truly see that, and how people have been treated differently. It's a clear indication where we're calling in, we're past calling in, and calling out, and really bringing this to the light, and really calling people to, come on, that is absolutely wrong. It's not a calling in issue, it's a calling out. Look at what you've done kind of situation. So when you look at it from that perspective, the two kind of people is really important. And that's where we get messed up, in that sometimes you may have a well-meaning person who wants to dip their toe into DEI work, but they're potentially being treated like somebody who has been a repeat offender, who has no interest in doing the work. And so they come in, they get called in, and they're completely put off. And so they decide not to do the work. They decide to be silent, even though it's not something they would prefer to do, but it's the safety. It's a safe option for them and their well-being. And so for me, calling in is allowing those people who are willing to do the work to hold them in a gentle space and to walk them through this. And for me, I'm a firm believer in love. Love drives out hate. And I believe that's what, Dr. King, his mission, that's what he spoke about. How are we going to get through this period of time? Let's do it, without violence. This non-violence is our way of doing this. And many people didn't agree with him. Not everybody didn't like Dr. King. He had his enemies. And there were other people, Black people, when you think about Malcolm X, super.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Very eloquent, and for him, his thing was by any means necessary. We're gonna do what we need to do. We are dignified men and women, and we're not gonna be treated like trash. And we're gonna fight back. We're gonna push back. And none of them were, wrong. Everybody just had a way of dealing with how the times were. And so now when you try and apply that lens now, you've got the calling out and you've got the calling in. And I believe in that TED talk with Loretta J. Ross. She really does make that comparison, with Dr. King back in the civil rights movement time in the 60s. And now when it comes to the ability to call in, and it is actually it's an act. It is something that is you've got to work on. It's a craft. Let me say that it's a craft to call in because you're really being led by love.
I think, gosh, there's so many things I think to what you said and just to reflect, but I think what you're saying here in terms of it being a craft, I mean, so true. I've seen you in your craft. And I think it's also just so much of what you're saying. I think there's an element of bravery on the person who's calling in's part, and maybe an element of healing that I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. I'm thinking through my own lens, which is very obviously different, but I'm just thinking through if I were doing work around supporting someone with maybe a trauma that's very similar to mine, it would be very hard for me to call them in. It would be very normal for me to maybe call out or to have a response because of I'm having a reaction based on that. And that would be right for me and it would be self-protective. And I think a lot of what you're describing here is that it is a lot of, I think, healing and bravery and work to be in a place that you can call in. And then the beautiful thing of that is when you are coming from a place of calling in and coming from a place of love, I think coming from a place of love is probably one of the most challenging, I would imagine, I can't know, but positions to come from with work like this. But it's also then a place that does allow people to stumble and fall and pick up and actually move forward. And one isn't better than the other, but I can see what you're saying with sort of like where they're coming from and the progression here.
It really, Kim, allows you to bring more people on the journey. It really does. And I love the quote by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where she says, if you're passionate about something, do it in a way that you will want others to come along with you, you know? And so if this is work that I am passionate about, it's necessary work. How can I do it in a way that will cause others to pay attention and to want to be part of this change-making cause? How can we change things for our industry? How can we change things for future generations? How can we change things within our homes and how we are interacting with each other? And, especially for the next generation, it starts with us. And so choosing love is a difficult path because it's always easier to be harder, to have a hard heart and to just kind of be like, well, I'm not doing that. I'm going to protect myself and just not extend the olive branch or be, because a lot of times kindness and love can be mistaken for weakness. Oh, she's such a weak person.
Yeah.
She's just calling them in and, just kind of, being so gentle. But I believe that there's a deeper thing. If you take it takes courage, it takes strength. And even in teaching this work, as you saw with me, it takes a lot of courage to be in that space, to hold that space and to learn these things over and over, because it's a painful history. It's a painful currency right now that we are living in, because we're obviously not over racism, but it is a necessary conversation. We need to be doing it. And what way feels right for me is doing it with love.
I appreciate that even the way you're describing calling in, you're doing with love and you're not making calling out wrong. And you're even showing the examples like we saw in the TED Talk where there are times that does make sense. And you're not saying one way is better than the other. And I think it's just a really beautiful demonstration of you and the approach of calling in, that even the way you're talking about this, you're essentially calling us in to even understand it that way. It's a little bit meta in that way. And it makes me think I've been in your container and I can only imagine what it takes to hold space. You hold space, I think, more powerfully than anyone I've ever seen hold space before. Truly, sincerely, you hold space remarkably. And I remember this makes me think of the calling in. I brought a question to you about sort of like fired up, like saw something in New York City and I saw something on the subway and sort of like, what should I do? I was like all ready to go and like go. I don't know what I thought I was going to do as a little tiny human being, and just the way you hold space around that and shifted that into an approach for calling in. I think that was the first time it clicked for me of what calling in really means in that approach. And I doubt that you remember the conversation, but one of the things you kind of led me towards was thinking more about how to approach their person being harmed, or how to ask questions. And makes me think here, maybe it would be helpful to talk a little bit, if we're thinking about calling in, what does that really look like? What does it look like in terms of an approach for calling in instead of calling out? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Calling in is very much about calling to the person's higher self. So you're not leading with, hey, Kim, how could you do that? Don't you know this is wrong? What kind of human being are you? How dare you do that? How dare you speak like that of Black people or whatever the case is? How dare you? You should know better. You know, you white people, blah, 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 blah. That is, I've come on you like a ton of bricks. What is Kim going to do? You are going to just back up and you're going to be like, hang on, I am not a bad human being. This, and you become defensive. You are defending the human being that you are. And so there's no room for dialogue here. You're already defensive. You do not want to hear anything that person has to say, because anything that they're saying is not a truth for you. It is not a truth of the human being that you are. But when you call in, you are actually appealing to their higher self. So an example of that is coming at it like, hey, Kim, you know, when you made that statement about not wanting to interact with Black people, or you feel uncomfortable when you see them down on the street, I'd really like to understand why you said that, because the Kim that I know, the Kim who is my friend, the Kim who I see has an incredible business that is impacting lives on such a great scale, that's not the Kim that I know. I know you're a decent human being. I've seen the work you do. I've seen how you're giving back to the community. Kim, please help me understand why that statement you made came out in that way. Why would you make a statement like that? Help me understand. See how that is dramatically different from coming at you like, you know, a ton of bricks and just judging you. This is about me. Calling in is about help me understand you better. Help me understand, because I don't want to take anything out of context, because I know you. And this is works particularly well when you know the person. But even though you do not know the person, you can still come into this with the lens of help me understand this a little bit more, because you're saying this, but I just want to understand, because based on this question, this is what comes up. Is that correct? And you go like, hey, no, I did not mean it in that way. But also what calling in does, it disarms the person. The person doesn't come back at you guns blazing. They are not defensive. They're actually hearing and going like, oh, I didn't even realize that this statement had this kind of meaning and is contrary to the kind of human being I am trying to live up to. Remember, we are imperfect. We are going to make mistakes. We're going to do things that are contrary to who we are. And same with parenting. Sometimes if you're a parent, a caregiver, you will yell at your kids and go like, oh man, that was in the heat of the moment. That's not me. And when you get to come down and go like, you know what, I shouldn't have done that. And so that it's the whole same principle with calling in. You are appealing to the person's higher self.
It's such a useful tool, and it's such a great way to think of it that way. I'm going to geek out a little bit on the brain, but when you're saying that, it just makes me think whenever we have someone call us out, we just go into a fight, flight, freeze response. So we're not only defensive, but we're literally in a part of our brain that doesn't allow us to think forward, that doesn't allow us to problem solve, that doesn't allow us to come up with new solutions. We're just so shut down. And so I think what's so brilliant here is, and I remember, because in that example, I like wanted to go like break up a fight or something like that, which like talk about like a horrible decision or something I was going to do. But like just even having the tool set there, it's like having that tool and calling in literally puts you into a part of your brain, which is safer and helps you think in a different way. And then we're seeing what that does for someone on the other side. The questions you were forming, it just immediately puts someone into, I can now be receptive. I can now literally shift my thinking and operate from that part of my brain. It's just, as someone who's been given the tool, it allows me to know how to navigate situations where I don't think I would have had the skill set before. Does that sound like I'm understanding correctly? Because
You
like,
are understanding. I remember with your situation, we talked about your safety first, before you can sort of launch into a situation, have a look around. How safe are you to do that? Because sometimes we might speak up and put ourselves in danger. So it's important to kind of reflect on what's going on. And maybe sometimes the safer option is to watch whatever is unfold, and then go to those in positions of authority, in positions, say it's in a restaurant or something, and maybe you witnessed some of the wait staff not treating this couple or this family, prioritizing them or serving them. I know that's happened to me many times, gone to restaurants and we haven't been served and we're just going like, hello, we came here before them, what's going on? But kind of observing that and just being like, hey, I come to this restaurant, I love your service and your food, but today I witnessed this and I just wanted to bring it to your attention because I know you're a great restaurant and I know you service is a really important thing. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. You've planted a seed. But you haven't gone there and gone like, hey, hang on, your wait staff has been really unreasonable. And how could they do that? And sometimes that might work. That calling out might work. But what will have a deeper and a lasting and a sustainable approach is when you call to the person's higher self.
It's huge. And yes, it's the safety piece, which important to remember. But I think what you're saying too, it's so much of your work is about how do we actually start being the change and creating change and how can we not be silent? But I think sometimes we don't have the tools. Yeah. And I know that's some of the conversations we were having. And so it's either with some of the examples you were giving earlier with calling in, someone in my family has said something at dinner and I don't know how to approach it. So what do? We say nothing or we do lash out and then we're having a big screaming fight, which all we do is kind of dig our heels in and each person's fighting more. Or the situation like you helped me really navigate, it's like then you have the tool to actually do something instead of, again, either getting harmed, which doesn't solve, like then it suddenly becomes about you and not even what's going on in the first place anyway, or actually being able to do something that enacts a change. It's really powerful. And that's speaking to someone's higher self piece. I just so appreciate your work because it's also so smart just from like a coaching perspective and how we actually can evolve as humans. And you do so much about how we can actually be genuine allies. I feel like this just helps give us the skill set, this tool set to actually start doing things in a way that we can be a part of change instead of just feeling like, well, okay, I know this is happening. I read the history books. That's horrible. Now let me just sit here because I don't know what to do, which I think is where we sit otherwise.
And because we are living life and life is happening around us and we will witness things, injustice and things that we don't agree with happening, sometimes you can't react immediately. And maybe sometimes it's not about reacting immediately. Maybe it's going home and really thinking about what happened and maybe having a conversation with your partner or whomever is around you, a trusted friend, and saying, I witnessed this, but I didn't speak up. And being able to kind of strategize, if this should happen again, how should I approach this? Or there's still time, I could still report this incident and do it in a way that I still feel safe, but I have done something about it. Speaking up doesn't always have to be in the moment because you've got to weigh out your options. Even when you have Christmas with relatives who will say something that is, offensive or something that, oh, you still have that little business of yours, Kim, how's that going? People who don't understand, our industry, and just being able to kind of take that in, but having a conversation in a safer space where you're not embarrassing them in front of everybody and just saying, hey, Dad, when you say such and such, it makes me feel this way. And I know you probably don't intend it in that way because I know how much you love me and this and the other. It always makes me feel this way. See, you've come at it from a different position, you've also done it at a different time when not everybody's there and you've kind of protected his dignity, so to speak. It's all about timing and just weighing up options. When's the best time? And sometimes you do need to go away and think about it because you don't have the words for it. And for me, as a Black woman, I have experienced times where I have been silent. In fact, I have probably been silent more than I have been vocal. And for me, getting into this work was very much after seeing the murder of George Floyd. I felt I could not be silent anymore. This was just a lived experience and work that I just put aside, and always felt like I am called into this, or I would love to talk about this, but no, what would people think? No, I don't want to ruffle feathers. What would my white friends think? This is crazy. I don't want to lose their friendship. So not wanting to go there. But there are times where things push you to a certain extent where you're like, my silence is serving nobody, but how can I do this in alignment to my values and who I am? Because for me, I hadn't seen examples of this kind of calling in displayed for me to go like, she's doing it that way. That's me. I'd like to do that in my own space and influence within my own, realm, and so to speak. But I had to craft my own. I had to figure out my own and stand in my own truth and just do what felt right for me. And this feels so good, having these conversations. And I cannot tell you, Kim, how many aha moments clients have had and gone like, oh my goodness, I never thought I could even talk to them in this way. I never thought that I was allowed to be silent when I see injustice and go away and process that and have a conversation with a trusted friend or person. I didn't know I was allowed that. I felt bad because I did nothing, and that makes me a bad human being. No, it doesn't. It's a learning opportunity.
It just gives us because it's so true. Like everything, I've had so many aha moments working with you, because I think there is that, like, I need to do it right. I need to call out. I need to speak out. I need to be loud. It has to look this way, or I'm doing it wrong, or I'm a bad human, or it's the perfectionism you've talked about. I think that was one of probably the biggest like ahas for me, where it's like, this doesn't even have to look perfect. But then seeing in that where it's like, I can do this in a different way. It's really fascinating how just that permission, suddenly you realize this is how we operate as humans and communicate anyway when we want to have conversations with people where we're having disagreements, and just having that moment, like you said, to do it in a different way. Let's have a quiet conversation where I don't have to call you out in front of the whole dinner table. How much more powerful that is, but how that's what we'd want to do under any other given context. And so as soon as you give that aha and light bulb, it just gives a shift to remember some of the things we forget that we know. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We all want to be treated with respect and dignity. So how would I want to be called in when I've made a mistake? Do I want to be embarrassed in front of a whole, group of people, or somebody calling me aside and just doing it with love? That would allow me to really pay attention. And though I might be embarrassed and a bit bruised, this person has done it in a way that still allows our relationship to continue, and in probably in many ways go deeper and flourish. So just thinking about how would I like to be treated?
One of the things, well, two things, and then I want to be mindful of your time, because I know it's the start of your workday, but when I watch the TED Talk again, and something you would remind us of as well, but something she says in there that's just so smart too, is it's sort of that reminder of who here hasn't made a mistake, who here hasn't done something before you knew better, where if, like, someone were to have seen that, where you would have like, oh my, like, I definitely have. And I think it's just kind of what you were saying, how would you want to be treated? I think the call-in approach is such a reminder of, we're all making, like, if you can have the grace for someone else having a mistake, we can all kind of start to grow together in this different, this different way.
When we stop elevating ourselves above others, when we start thinking of ourselves as, I make mistakes too. I had to start this journey somewhere. Yes, it's a lived experience, but I had to learn the language to teach it. Just because you have the lived experience, and just because I've been doing this in a corporate perspective, I had to learn the language of how do I do this in the coaching industry and personal development. And so when it comes to showing grace to other people, remember you started from somewhere. Remember what you know in business, or what you are trying to learn in DEI, and thinking, well, I know this terminology and I know this, and you shouldn't use that term, don't you know? You learned from someplace. You either read it or somebody told you it, or, or you got corrected, or maybe you got called out and now you're calling out
Mhm.
other people. Remember, we've all had to start from someplace, learning how to do this work or anything for that matter. And so show grace to those who haven't, so that they can stay in this work for as long as it takes, because we need as many people as possible who are pushing back against these systems of oppression.
It's the other thought that came up, and as you were saying that, 'cause I've heard you say too, that this is really the approach then that allows for this work to be sustainable and allows for this work actually to make change. And I reflect your own words back to you this way, but I don't know if there's anything you want to say on that, because I think everyone watching on the replay too, I think that's the whole reason we're here, is we do want to be a part of the change. And I think sometimes we just can lose our way in that. And you're just giving this tool here that actually allows for that sustainability.
Absolutely. And I think the only thing I would add there, Kim, is the power of conversations.
Yes.
As you begin to get into this work, as you dip your toe into DEI work and trying to understand it either from a business perspective or from a life perspective, because the two actually go hand in hand. You can't just do DEI for your business and it not touch your life. In fact, it's the other way around. The inner work first begins with you. And then once you've actually had that understanding, the language, the education, you've had a little bit of exposure to this, then you start looking into your business and how can I do better in my business? Because in my life, I'm already incorporating this, but how do I do this in my business? And that's where having conversations is so important. Having conversations with loved ones and not going like, hey, Fred, you can't say that anymore just because you were part of a class that I gave and you learned something. It's going like, hey, Fred, you know what? I've been part of this class and I've been learning this. And you know why I took the class in the first place? Because of, A, B, C, D. But this is what I've been learning. And I'm just getting very convicted as I learn about this and just being challenged in some of the things. What are your thoughts on this? And just opening up that door of conversations, because conversations are so powerful. And whether or not Fred might be on board with what you're doing or not, what you've done is planted a seed. And wherever Fred goes, be it to work, be it in the subway, traveling or whatever, and he sees something that is related to some of the things that you were talking about, he will remember. He will remember and he will make the choice of how he is to respond based on the conversations that you're probably having at home. And what I've seen with a lot of my clients, what we learn inside the containers, they get trickled into family, partners become so much more aware. They're beginning to have deeper conversations with parents. They're trying not to call them out and call them in with love. They're bringing up their children to be aware about the differences, but doing it in a way that still has their family values around that. And they're not having the fear that is that stops them from introducing these things to their children. They know that there is room to make mistakes and to learn. And so they're dipping their toes and their feet and they're getting in there to do this work. But conversations go hand in hand with this work. Begin to talk to the people in your life about this work and what you're discovering. Open up the channels of communication, because the more you do it with the people that you love and trust, the more you'll have that the racial stamina is what I call having the stamina to, when you see something, potentially have the strength to speak up. If it is to tell a manager that you've witnessed something that you didn't think was right, based on the values of that establishment, it will give you the language, it'll give you the stamina, the muscle that you need to do this work. So conversations are powerful, and that's a whole topic on its own, I believe, Kim.
It is a whole topic on its own, but I'm glad you're throwing it in, because that's one of the gifts. I took many gifts from your work, but we're having more conversations at home. And I think exactly to what you said, it's a practice, it's a muscle, and calling in is, for me, it's not easy. I mean, that's why I applaud your work so much. It is so much easier to see something and want to either freeze or to react or to yell or to all of the things all the ways we can human. And so I think exactly to what you're saying, conversations are powerful and changing and healing, and they plant the seeds, like you said. But I think it's also stretching that muscle so that we can call in, so that we can not be silent, but in a way that is speaking to someone's higher self, or doing so in a way that actually helps create change. So yes, it's a whole conversation on conversations, but I'm glad you dropped that nugget for everyone. I know there is so much that you have to offer. And I know you also have a workshop coming up, and this might actually be a great time to tell everyone about that, because otherwise I could just have you here for 4 hours.
We could talk.
I like my questions, so I would also just keep asking you questions.
I do have a workshop that is happening next week, Wednesday, the 19th of January, which might be Tuesday the 18th for you.
I think you're in the future for us.
Yes, this is Australian date and time, and it's all about setting your DEI goals for this year. And the beauty with goals is that you can set them up at any time. It doesn't always have to be at the start of the year, but obviously the start of the year is when we're all pulled to doing that, because a new year is a new beginning and we want to set intentional goals for the year. And so I have prepared an incredible workshop, masterclass, if you like, where I'll be sharing with you what DEI is, first and foremost, understanding the terminology. A lot of people hear DEI, they hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, and equality, and they don't even understand. They're like, what's equity and what's equality? What's the difference? So I'll be pulling apart those terminologies and really explaining them to you in a way that you can actually understand and see how it relates to you and your life and your business. And then really getting into what goals are like. What kind of goals should you be setting for your business? And they need not to be anything over the top. A lot of people think like, oh my God, now I need to bring out this big file and start learning about this. What I love is having goals that allow you to take baby steps. And a simple goal could be like, what kind of DEI work do I want to dip my toe into this year? Is there a particular book I have had mentioned over and over again, and I haven't made time for that? Could I be subscribing to a podcast where I can learn more about, anti-racism work? Can I make time for that during my morning walk, or while I'm at the gym, or while I'm doing different chores around the house? Can I make time for that? So looking at different types of goals that you can set, so that you can look back and go like, I did this, and this is what I learned, and this is the next step I'd like to take. But I think more so as a business owner, it is so imperative, so important that as you build your business, that you are actually making room for DEI, because DEI is part and parcel of how we do life and how we do business. We are going to get into a time whereby people, your potential clients, customers, will be looking to see what differentiates you from the rest. What makes you an inclusive business owner? How are you holding space for those with marginalized identities? What are you doing? As a business owner, you're a leader. People are looking up to you. And so it is so important to be educating yourself on these things. And the best way you can do that is to begin to set those DEI goals. And I would love nothing more than to walk you through how you can actually cultivate and put together goals that you will be proud of, and also help you preempt any blocks that may come along, the things that stop you from taking action, giving you the tools of how to navigate that and unpack that and set you up in a position where you can do the best you can as far as DEI goes for your business and your life as well.
I will make sure we drop the link for that, because all of your work is incredible, and it's such an important workshop. But I think just for what you said, this is what the foundation every business needs, but every human needs. And I think this group, like everyone who's in this group, is heart-centered and they're passion-driven. Part of being both of those is being a human, and this is human work as much as it's business work. And if we're serving other humans, if we're working with other humans, it's crazy to think that this is not part of the work, if we care so much about our energy and our mindset and our health and what we're eating so that we can serve clients well, it's crazy to think that this is not also a part of the diet, so to say, or the work, so to say. And to what you're saying, it is a lot. It is a big thing to digest. We digest something big one step at a time. That's why it's lifelong work. So I will drop the link for everyone, but I highly recommend everyone. Like if you do one, I'm not a big supporter of go take all the trainings, do all the things. This is a training to take. This is a place to set yourself up. This is the human work we all need to be doing. And as you're seeing, Annie has an approach, I think, that is just really allows you to actually be able to move forward and to do this work. So I will drop that link, and I'm just so grateful to you for being here.
Thank you so much. And I just want to take a moment to just honor you, Kim, for inviting me on here today and for the work that you've done in this, in this area. You are leading from the front. You are, head and shoulders above so many people with platforms that are so influential and could be doing more. And so you are setting an example in our industry. And so I just want to honor you for, doing the difficult work. And I know this is a journey, it doesn't end. This is lifelong work, but I just want to take a moment and just let you know that I see you and I know the work that you're putting in behind closed doors and even in this way. And just want to honor you for just bringing this to light and just having this conversation with me and having me on here today. I honor you and just love what you do, and just thank you so much for having me.
I will receive that. It feels like what I should be doing, but thank you for creating the space for me to do the work. I mean, sincerely, I'm able to because you've given me so many tools and held space in a way to allow for that. So I just thank you. I'll receive that, but I just reflect that back to you in a trillion different ways. So I love you. I love your work. I'm hugging you through this. And with that, I will say to everyone in the group, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being a part of this conversation. If you're watching on the replay, drop some love for Annie, because this is also for her. You have to imagine she just came in. We're a group of strangers for her. So give her some love for being willing to share all of this and to share her wisdom and to help all of us move forward. So thank you all for being here. Annie, thank you. And I'm going to see you all next Tuesday.
Thanks.